Hello, my name's Steve and welcome to the Seaside Allotment channel, and today I thought we'd take a look at kind of compare and contrast between coal frames, hoop tunnels and the polytunnel, and what they're good for, what they're not good for, some of the issues with them, and basically how I've designed mine. So let's take a look. We'll start with the coal frame. Okay, so here's a simple coal frame design, and I've been very pleased with this, I've got to say. And basically on the bottom is just a raised bed, and then on top is just another raised bed frame that's just braced to attach the two together. And then on the top is basically a raised bed cut in half, and the wood shop that I got just did that chop in half for me, which makes it really easy. And that's the coal frame in its closed position. And you can see that I have just a little bit of a vent even in the closed position, because it's never really good to have these closed. Humidity rises too high, and you're at the risk of moulds and mildew and things like that. So ideally you want this thing open as much as possible, and in my design I've got several different venting settings. And the first one is just to take my little venting block and stick it in like this, and that gives me an inch vent, and that's okay even in the harshest weather really. The only time I've ever taken these inch vents out is when we're expecting a hard frost. So the next venting position looks like this. So in that position we've got maybe 3 inches of vent, and that is brilliant really. I should just point out that all these coal frames, they all face south. You don't get a lot of light in, but you do get a good vent through there. The wind blows through there nicely, and there's no risk of hail, rain or really bad winds getting in there. So that is a pretty good venting position. I use that a lot in the depths of winter. But ideally you want a bit more light, and although obviously light comes through the top, as you can see there, it's a reasonable amount of light getting through there, it's not perfect. So really ideally you want the next venting position. So to vent next I use these, and these are just the standard sides that I use in all my coal frames, and I had a few spare, so I just chopped them off and just a few bits of spare wood put on the sides, and then we get a venting position that looks like this. Now it's actually quite late in the afternoon at the moment, and so we're still not getting much sun, but from probably 9 o'clock in the morning through till 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun is streaming in through here. And actually in winter you don't actually need it open any more than this to get pretty much full sun through the whole day. So that works pretty well, but actually it's a little bit bouncy if you want it vented like this, and just leave it no matter what the wind situation is. So I pop in another prop. So you can see now I've got 3 props, and it is absolutely rock solid now, and pretty much in any winding conditions you can leave it like this. And so this is a fantastic way in sort of late autumn and through winter. You get the beds that get no heavy rain, they're sheltered from the wind because the prevailing wind direction is from the back, and no hail or anything like that. And obviously you can close them up a bit more if you want to, but pretty much you can leave them like this all the time if you wanted to, and structurally everything is going to be fine. So that is the basics of the coal frame, but I can also do a bit better than that. So if the weather's really nice, I can just open the coal frame top up completely and rest it on the bed behind, and every coal frame will rest on the bed behind it in this way, and so that works really nicely. So just a few more points of detail. Hold the coal frame closed with the bungee cord. Fasten the bungee cord to the coal frame base with a coat hook, chromed coat hook, So these weather really well, nice and smooth, so they don't wear anything, really robust and really flexible. So I'll just quickly show you how that works. So there we go, that's the bungee cord fitted, and you can see this is, well, you can't see, but it's really rigid now. This is pretty much weatherproof. And yep, you can see in there the seedlings really love it. Now, what's this good for from a growing perspective? So the real benefit of a cold frame, by far the best benefit, is that you can start things off at this time of year, which is November time, all the way through to early December, and pop little little plug plants in, and they'll overwinter just lovely. And then the protection that the cold frame gives means that you get a really early start, so everything is growing really strongly by March, and you're harvesting really at full speed basically in April. Now, without the cold frame, anything planted outside is not really going to do very much until sort of probably May time, so you get probably maybe 2 months of extra growing time. And obviously it extends the season at the back end as well, but that's not quite as good a benefit. And then it holds things in winter quite well. So things that you've grown in September, October and November, you can hold those well protected and eat from them in December and January and early February before new things start growing. So it does provide benefits all the way through the more challenging 6 months of the year, autumn, winter and spring, early spring, late autumn, winter and early spring. But as I say, the real biggest benefit is a really good early start. Now, you can achieve similar sorts of things with fleece, and obviously fleece is a heck of a lot cheaper, but I gotta say, I just love the cold frames. They're a little bit more expensive, but you get really good light levels, you get really good protection from the snow and too much rain. They're just really robust in all weather conditions. Yeah, I just love them. I'm very pleased with them. Now, the other thing is they're really easy to adapt for use later on in the season. So from late spring we take the tops off late April time, and we leave the tops off until mid-autumn time. So yeah, they're really easy. I just quickly unscrew them, which takes 30 seconds. Bear in mind I'm using stainless steel screws. I think it's really important to use stainless steel screws when you need to be able to undo them many times in their life. Ordinary screws that I've found, even sort of cadmium coated type screws, they're okay to put in once and never remove, but if you want to take them in and out, get the stainless steel ones. And I just have a really simple storage system for them. So I'm just at the back of the polytunnel, and I've got this really robust pallet fence here, and you can see I've got some cold frame tops here. And this shows you actually that I can just swap them for netted frame tops as well. And I've got this one here, which is just scaffold netting, and I've also got EnviroMesh frames as well down there. And some of them are half frames that go over just half of the cold frame. Some of them are full. And yeah, I just pop them down here, held in place by these little screws in here, and bungee cords hold everything in place as well. And it's great, out of the way, nice and safe and sound, and I can put all the cold frame tops down here, no problem at all. So there's one more little design detail, which is this central wooden divider here, and you might think, what's the possible use of that? Because all it does is shade in a late afternoon. That bed there gets shaded, but actually I've been really pleased with it. Not only does it make everything much more rigid, but the real benefit of it is it means that you can lean with your hand onto any point basically in there. You can kneel on it, and it makes it really easy to harvest the back of the cold frame. It's very difficult when the cold frame tops are on to get to the back of the cold frame, but it's really easy when you've got that to kneel on and lean onto. So actually it's worked really well. Okay, so let's now take a look at the hoop tunnels, and these are very different. Okay, so here is a little hoop tunnel, and it's got lots of common elements to it. The venting arrangements are all pretty much the same. So you've got the same little venting blocks, you've got the same big venting supports, and it's hinged in exactly the same way. Construction is very simple. It's basically just a rectangular frame into which there are alkathene water pipes inserted and just screw fastened here just so they don't come out, and then a bit of plastic stretched over with a wooden support rail along the top. And I do have another video which I'll put in the show notes that goes into the construction a bit more, but let's open it up and have a look. The hoop tunnels also just open up and they lean on the bed behind, which is just really convenient for harvesting. But you can also put the struts in, and once the support struts are in, they're also very rigid, but they're not quite as rigid as the cold frames. Obviously the potential for the wind to catch them is greater. They don't have the central support, although you could add the central support if you really wanted to, but really these little hoop tunnels, I love them. The best thing about them is that they've got a bigger air volume, so they stay warm longer, they capture more light, they provide, there's light gets in from all sides rather than just from the front. And even though they open south facing, we're not perfectly south facing here, so in the late afternoon they do get lots of light in from the back in the hoop tunnels, so they're just fantastic from that point of view. So things do grow in here better and faster than they do in the cold frames, and so for harvesting stuff in winter, these are just fantastic. You do get a little bit more growth further into December and earlier into February. So from that perspective, they're really brilliant. And of course you've got more space, so you can grow crops that grow higher. The cold frames are great for starting things that grow tall, but obviously once they grow more than about 18 inches or something like that, then the cold frames are not much use. But actually that's not that much of an issue, because by the middle of April sort of time, you're taking the tops off anyway. So you start things off early, it's no problem at all. So generally speaking, they are superior. The hoop tunnels are superior from most perspectives to the cold frames, apart from they're more expensive to make, and they catch the wind a bit more, so venting is a little bit more of a challenge. And if you want to take them off, storage is a bit of a challenge. I am fortunate that I have this little path that runs down the side of my plot, and I can store quite a few of these hoop tunnels down here, but also I do try and find uses for them. So peppers and tomatoes, sweet potatoes and things like that grow really well in these little hoop tunnels, so you can leave them on if you want to. Now you can see I have got quite a range of things on here, and yeah, absolutely fabulous. I love them, and I'll stick a few photos on the end of this to show you what I've got growing. But the piece de la resistance really is still the polytunnel. So when I started a couple of years ago, I started with mostly the little hoop tunnels, because they're the best thing I think to start with, and even if you just have 2 or 3, it makes a massive difference. Then I added the cold frames, and then this year I added the big polytunnel. I found really that the hoop tunnels probably paid off their investment cost in about 3 months. The cold frames probably about two months, and the polytunnel took the whole harvest volume of the plot for the first 3 months of the year to pay off. So yeah, it takes a little bit longer, but then wow, it's fantastic. So obviously in the polytunnel you've got absolutely maximum growing flexibility. You can grow stuff as tall as you want all the way through winter. Everything grows beautifully in here. It is like spring, a perfect spring day for most of the time. The quality of the salads, for example, in here are substantially better than anything that I'm getting in any of the hoop tunnels or coal frames. It's really viable to effectively keep the frost off quite easily. Of course you can put fleece down in the hoop tunnels and the coal frames, but it's a pain to add and remove, whereas in here the fleece is all there ready to go. It takes 2 or 3 minutes to lay it over the beds, and then maybe a minute to fasten it back up there again. This is the north face over here, so everything just gets sun all day long, and this fleece doesn't cause any problems. In fact, the fleece just provides that little bit of insulation to the bed all the time against that cold north face of polythene. I've got so much stuff in here. I've got all sorts of different salads and spring onions, overwintering carrots, celery, which should last all through the winter. I've got a lovely little brassica crop in here, which is here just for convenience, for harvesting on the worst days. I've got overwintering brassicas. I've got my seed starting table. I've got my big trellis table, which you use for harvesting and seed starting. And then later on in the season, we'll have all sorts of tomatoes and peppers and things like that up there. I've got salads all the way down here as well, loads of spring onions, early garlic, loads of stuff like that. Now come springtime, all of this bed is converted into tomatoes, and they just grow up on strings, and the strings fasten to these crop bars. And then down the front, in front of the tomatoes, I'll have pepper plants all the way down there. But it gets better than that. All the way down here I've got strawberry plants that will be brought into the polytunnel for a lovely early crop. I have my early and late potatoes. These are my Christmas potatoes. The tops are finished now, but they're stored there. And I'll be starting early potatoes in here. In fact, I actually start them in the conservatory where it's a bit warmer. What I do is I'll take a pot, something like this one, but probably a little bit deeper. I'll plant my potatoes down here, fill it up to the top, and just stick it under my desk in the conservatory, and just leave it for about a month. After about a month, they'll break through, and so that'll be in sort of March time. I'll bring that into the polytunnel in March. I'll pop fleece over the top of it if there's any frosty days, and then in April I'll put it outside, bring it back inside if there's a threat of a light frost, and then eventually it'll stay outside. So lovely early potatoes, fantastic for that. I've got my early peas in here, and I have just masses of early stuff that I grow in the polytunnel, so I absolutely love it. And of course it also provides a fantastic place to chill out on the winter days, or actually even summer days when it's raining or just a little bit windy or whatever. So yeah, the polytunnel is highly recommended. Now this polytunnel cost about £1,000, and as I say, it took us the harvest from the first 3 months of the year to pay it off, and so it was a really good investment. And I do recommend some design features here. I've got doors at this end and doors at this end. They're double doors, they're sliding doors, which are great in the windy weather that we get around here. And So I get a beautiful breeze that blows through. I can have doors open or closed at either end depending on the wind direction, and I've got lots of crop bars up here in the roof because in summertime the whole roof is covered with stuff growing. And then finally I got some little mesh tunnels, and these complement the hoop tunnels, and are especially useful in winter in summer for a few reasons. So here's an example of one of my mesh tunnels, and they're basically the same design as the plastic covered hoop tunnels, but they're just covered with scaffold mesh. Now there are some advantages. Obviously they do to some extent keep the pests off, but it's not a perfect solution. Pests do tend to find their way in somehow or other, but it does keep the birds off, does reduce pest pressure a little bit. They do provide some shade in summer, which is really useful, and I also do is lay some shade cloth over the top of them and just clip it on here to these. And that's brilliant when you just put in new plug plants of lettuce or something like that out. It really does make a big difference. I also do the same thing with the coal frames. What I'll do is I'll have taken these plastic tops off and I'll put an environment mesh top on the coal frames, and again that just provides some much needed shade when I'm starting things off. Even in winter, these little mesh covers provide some advantages. So for example, these spring onions are suffering a lot less wind damage than the ones that are just outside, because the mesh does reduce the wind speed quite substantially, and it really helps. Keeps the hail off them as well, and does keep the snow off them. So, you know, from quite a few perspectives it's pretty good, and they don't seem to suffer much from lack of light. As you can see, these are all growing really strongly, and the same can be said of the winter miner's lettuce and the rocket that I've got down here. These grow really well, and I've noticed, you know, quite a substantial improvement in the winter miner's lettuce that's under here by comparison with the stuff that's in the open ground. So even in winter these are pretty good, but really they're primarily designed for summer. There's not many plants you can overwinter in them. Basically it's lamb's lettuce, spring onions, rocket and winter miner's lettuce. There's probably a few that I'm forgetting, but they're the main ones that I overwinter. And then finally I do have this mini greenhouse, and there are a few advantages to this. Now, because this mini greenhouse is a much smaller space, it is viable to keep this frost free, and I've got a little heater down here, but actually most of the time I don't need to do that because I've got a multi-layer system. So first thing is I've got this little greenhouse inside the greenhouse, and once this is zipped up, this keeps a couple of degrees of frost off. Then I've got fleece that I can put over things in here, and again that keeps more frost off. And I can put fleece on top of things like these overwintering calabrese, and yeah, does really well. So to a large extent, unless it's kind of down at -8, -10 or something like that, I don't really need to keep this frost free. Now you might say, well, these things can stand a frost, and they can, but I find that every time something gets a frost that's sort of tender like this, it does kind of provide a bit of a check to the growth. So yeah, I prefer to keep it frost free if I can and if it's easy. And I think I've probably spent, in the 3 years that I've had this, probably about £5 on fuel. So it's, you know, the cost is negligible. Now the other thing, being glass, you do get more light in here than you do in the polytunnel, and with the positioning of this, it does get pretty much sun for most of the day, so it's pretty fantastic. And so I tend to do a lot of seed starting in here and bringing seedlings on in here rather than in the polytunnel. But it's easier to water and things in the polytunnel, and it doesn't quite get as hot in the polytunnel as it does in here because the polytunnel is better vented. But anyway, little greenhouse does have its uses. So that's a quick introduction to the different things that I've got to aid with growing on my plot. And we've also got lots of open beds on Jenny's plot and Debbie's plot for growing stuff that doesn't really need any protection, that doesn't need an early start. Now we do use fleece a little bit as well for protection, but only generally just for about a month when we're planting stuff out in early spring, and it's just that little, you know, a little bit of protection from the wind just gets things going, like the onions that we plant from seed. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that. Would love to get some comments and feedback on how you grow and how you overwinter stuff, and what your experience is of different ways of protecting your crops. All right, well, I'll see you soon.